committee meeting, and can I welcome the members of the public in the public area this evening, and can I also welcome all those watching on YouTube. Before I start, if anyone is watching this evening and is waiting to see item 5B, application number 210356 full, former Rose and Crown site, Maysfield Road, Braintree, that application has been withdrawn and will not be considered this evening. And now come on to item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Mrs Beavers, who is being substituted by Councillor Thorogood, Councillor Johnson, who has no substitute, Councillor Mrs Spray, who is being substituted by Councillor Hensman, and Councillor Wrench, who also has no substitute. Everyone else is here. Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Thorogood.
Yeah, I need to declare a non-pecuniary interest on the third item, the application 22000384 variation, because I objected to the variation and asked it to be called in, and I will be reading a statement and then leaving afterwards.
Is that not a disclosable pecuniary interest and not a non? I'm not sure. Is it non-pecuniary?
Sorry, Chairman. It's a non-pecuniary interest, but on the basis that Councillor Thorogood has predetermined the application, he needs to leave. He is permitted to speak during question time, but he has to leave during the consideration of the application.
Right. Thank you. Anyone else? No. Item 3. Members, I have the minutes of 2 meetings for your consideration this evening. The first meeting was on the 3rd of May. Is it your wish that I sign these as a true record? Can I have a...
Move them as a true record, Chair.
Second,
Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. And the second set of minutes was for the 14th of June.
Move them too, Chair.
Thank you very much. Is that fine?
Second again, Madam Chairman.
All those in favour, I sign as true record. Thank you very much. That brings us to item 4, public question time. We have no general questions this evening. People wishing to make a statement will make the statement prior to the application that we are going to consider. So that brings us straight on to planning applications. And the first application is 5A, application 21-01665 Out Stables Retreat, Beslins Road, Great Bardfield. I do have a speaker on this application. It's Councillor Mrs. Lindsay Haywood-Smith, and she is speaking on behalf of Great Bardfield Parish Council. Can I invite you to the table to make your statement, and just remind you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Great Bardfield Parish Council objects most strongly to this application on the following grounds. The proposed development site is currently a paddock adjacent to Stables Retreat. It's therefore a greenfield site in a very rural location. The site is outside the village envelope, which is tightly drawn around the existing development line of the village. Building outside this line is entirely contrary to Braintree District Council's planning policies, which apply to their local plan. BDC have sufficient housing stock to meet their demands and have not allocated any housing requirement to Great Bardfield in their local plan, which has been agreed by the inspector. The site is within the former hamlet of Bridge End, adjacent to the conservation area of Great Bardfield, and would have a detrimental impact on the character of this area. The Great Bardfield Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan, adopted by BDC in July 2020, describes it thus. The area comprises the historic hamlet of Bridgend. It's bounded by the River Pant to the south and open countryside to the north. The proposed site is on a slope above the environmentally important valley of the River Pant, and any development here would be observed from and dominate the valley. It's an entirely inappropriate setting for a development of this nature. The Conservation Area Assessment document makes much of the importance of views into and out of the village of Great Bardfield. These views were very popular with the Bardfield artists and feature in many of their works. Great Bardfield Parish Council believe that any development of this site would negatively impact the views across the river from the village. The location of the site is on a blind bend of a very narrow, quiet, protected lane. It's bounded by banks and hedges, which mean visibility is very limited. There are no clear sight lines along this stretch. Currently, traffic using this lane, by necessity, move very slowly, as the lane is only one vehicle wide and is frequently used by walkers, joggers, cyclists and horse riders. Pedestrians regularly have to mount the banks to allow larger vehicles to pass. Additional traffic caused by any development, both during the build and afterwards, would also have a serious detrimental impact on the exit from Beslins Lane onto the Finchingfield Road at Bridgend, close to the narrow historic bridge over the River Pant. The width of the new access road to the development site would, by necessity, require removal of ancient protected hedgerows. We urge Braintree District Council to refuse planning permission for this site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Miss Haywood-Smith, for attending and making your statement. We have no one else wishing to make a statement on this application this evening, so we'll now go to the presentation, and that is going to be made by Natalie. Good evening, and thank you, Natalie.
Good evening, members. This application is seeking outline planning permission for the erection of up to 4 detached dwellings and associated works, with all matters reserved except for scale and access at Stables Retreat on Beslins Road, Great Bardfield. This is a location plan showing the site outlined in red there. The site area is approximately 0.39 of a hectare, and the conservation boundary is some 85 metres to the west of the site. This is a Google Earth image showing you the site in relation to Beslins Lane, and I'm not sure if you can make out very clearly on there, but the lane is pretty much tree-lined on the north side, although there are views over to the open countryside as the south part of the area opposite the site has no hedging. This is a safeguarding map which shows the settlement boundary for Great Bardfield in the adopted local plan, and again in the Section 2 local plan, and you will see that the site is unallocated for development in either the adopted local plan or the Section 2 plan. This is a site plan showing that it's proposed to site approximately 4 large detached houses set back around 11 metres from the back of the highway, with the access approximately 21 metres to the east of Brooklands. The dwellings would be set back about 11 to 16 metres from the highway. and the land is in an elevated position at least 1 metre above the extent of the highway. And also, as said by the parish council representative, there is a slope in the site from west to east, going down across the site. These are illustrative house types giving an indication to us, although these are not up for consideration, they are showing us that quite large detached two-storey houses are proposed in this location. This is a drawing that was included with the Highway Impact Assessment, which has been viewed by Essex County Council Highways, and no objection has been raised to the proposal in terms of highway safety. Did I do that? Sorry. And so, I didn't mean to do that. We're now turning to look at photographs within the site to show you, as you can see, it's a former paddock. That's looking towards the site boundary, and looking west towards Brooklands, which is where you can see the telegraph pole there. And that's the roadside boundary within the site. And this is the existing access, which is from adjacent the bungalow, which is to the west of the site, and is used by Stables Retreat. And that's looking the other way towards the site. Now, here are some photographs taken outside of the boundary, which this shows the outside site boundary, in which you can see the elevated nature of it above the level of the highway. And that indicates that's looking towards the west, and indicates the slope that there is in the road. And again, this sort of illustrates the height of the site above the highway. You can see there's an existing structure on there that is already within the site. And then that's looking the other way towards the southeast. And again, now the nearby properties within the vicinity are all single story, and that represents one of our issues in terms of the proposed impact of the development, in it being sort of alien and out of context with the sporadic development that is already in situ. And that's Brooklands at the western end of the site. Now, the main issues as I see it is that the fact that the site is in a countryside location, it is outside the settlement boundary, and is not proposed or has been allocated for any development. In terms of sustainability, we don't consider that it is a sustainable location, as there's no footpath or lighting. The other issues are the visual impact on the countryside, the protected lane and the conservation area. There has been no survey of the roadside hedge to determine if it meets the priority habitat criteria, as the site is on a protected lane. In addition, no consideration has been given to that the hedgerow could be protected under the Hedgerow Regulations 1997 due to its longevity and presence in the landscape. As the hedgerow would clearly have to be removed to facilitate the access, significant compensation would be required to enable the council to meet its duty under Section 40 of the Natural Environment and Rural Communities Act. The landscape team endorses the views of the ecology officer and suggests that it is evidence that the hedge is species rich and makes a very positive contribution to the character of the protected lane. It is clear that achieving the required sightlines would require complete removal of the hedge. A condition would also be required to restrict the height of the vegetation to 600 millimetres within the visibility splays. Further, Besniss Lane is single track, it has no footpath, and as such is impractical in terms of encouraging walking to access necessary amenities. The site plan also shows quite large dwellings, and although we cannot be precise about the potential impact on the conservation area due to the absence of any parameter plans or details of height, etc., it will have an impact, particularly if the whole hedge does have to come out. The level of harm, whilst not being sufficient in terms of itself to warrant refusal, it weighs against the proposal in the overall planning balance. And whilst it may be possible to create safe access on the lane, it would be at considerable expense of this attractive and verdant nature of this protected lane, resulting in unacceptable harm to the countryside. In terms of the highways update, we have gone back to highways and asked them for more clarity about their response. and they have reiterated that they don't have any objection in terms of highway safety or in terms of the conditions that they recommend in order to create the safe visibility displays that would be required. So therefore, highway safety cannot form a reason for refusal of the application. However, as explained previously, the impact on the protected, the appearance of the protected lane and the overall, the wider countryside is extremely pertinent. And in summary, I put it up here, the site is within the countryside, Beslins Road is protected, it's single track and has no footpaths or street lighting. It's not sustainable in practical terms and would lead to residents relying on the private car. It would have a detrimental and harmful impact upon the wider rural character and appearance of the locality through the loss of trees and hedges to enable the proposed vehicle access to be constructed. And it would give rise to less than substantial harm to the setting of the conservation area. Further, the creation of the access together with the erection of 4 two-storey dwellings would have a detrimental visual impact, resulting in the erosion of its verdant and rural character, which together with the introduction of a form of development that would be alien to the context would result in material harm to the physical appearance of the lane to the detriment of this part of Great Bardfield. So consequently, we conclude that although we aren't able to make the decision tonight because an appeal has been submitted, we can conclude that the harms arising from the development, including the harm arising from the conflict with the development plan, would outweigh the stated benefits, such that planning permission should be refused in line with the development plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Thank you. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's very difficult not to agree with both the Parish Council's views and the officers' views in the report and stated this evening. I think they, between them, covered it extremely well. I mean, the main points for me, unallocated site, not in the local plan, not in the emerging local plan, beyond development boundaries and therefore in the countryside where countryside policies apply. You picked up the unsustainable location, dependence on the private motor car, travel by car, out of character with the existing dwellings in this part of Beslins Road. I can't, for the life of me, see how the County Council has missed the fact that it's protected lane and has nothing of significance to say about the proposal impact on that. I thought that might have been a starting point, and they also seem, fairly blasé about the impact of achieving the access in the site displays on the actual rurality and appearance of the lane itself. But they've even doubled up on what they've said to us and not recognised any concern, which is extraordinary. So it's detrimental in its wider visual impact on the rural character and the appearance of the whole of that locality. And I hope that our views will be communicated and find favour with the inspectorate.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I agree with Councillor Mann and very much agree with the carefully put views of the Parish Council. The thing I wanted to focus on is, obviously, it is contrary to policy, that's very clear. It is the lane and the impact. The site layout plan is clearly wrong because it shows the hedge extant as if it's just punching a hole through it. Well, you'd have, to the right, you'd have zero visibility. Clearly, that would not be allowed by county. we don't have a survey on ecology or value of the hedge, but clearly it's likely to have value. And I echo Councillor Mann's concerns about the County Council. This isn't the first time they've done this. They appear to always look at these applications in terms of sort of a hard process position without looking at the other aspects. Another good example is Little Braxted Lane in Rivenhall, where they allowed a quarry access. Great big stretch of the lane has had its hedges removed. It wasn't a concern to them, even though it's a protected lane. And so if we allowed this to happen, there's no doubt that that lane would be very significantly impacted, which is another reason why it's contrary to policy. I don't know if you want me to move something, Madam Chair, but I'll move as per the report that we would be minded to refuse this had we been forming a decision.
Does that find a seconder before I move on? It does, Councillor Mann, thank you. Does anyone else wish to add anything further? No. Well, it has been moved and seconded that we would have been minded to refuse this application. It had come to us before the appeal had been made. All those in favour of that decision? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you very much. As I have already explained, 5B has been withdrawn. We now come on to item 5C. This is application 22000384 VAR, land northeast of Inworth Road, Fearing. This can be found on pages 70 to 101. And Councillor Thorogood, you're making your statement in the public gallery, I believe. Am I correct?
Is that right?
Yes. Yes. You can make it.
Thank you for allowing me, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to speak on this matter this evening. I originally objected to this variation of condition back in March and asked it to be called in after residents notified my District Council Ward member colleague and myself about the installation of unapproved first floor windows in new properties that overlook households in Inworth Road, Fearing. Concerns were also raised by Fearing Parish Council regarding this retrospective application to change what was previously permitted in a planning application 1901/222 REM. It is my view these unapproved windows, which are the subject of a pending planning enforcement case, will compound the problem of existing properties on Inworth Road being more overlooked than they already are by this new development, including a Grade 2 listed heritage asset. In the past, some of these existing residents have themselves been prohibited from adding bathroom windows or making other changes that would overlook other properties. So for the sake of consistency, the same principle should be applied to volume developers, and for that reason, I would ask the recommendation for this application to be granted is overturned. Not only did the work on these properties go ahead in advance of the decision of this application, the properties have, I understand, been sold and new residents have already moved in. I am in no way criticising the new residents, but the development, in my view, built and completed while a planning committee decision on a variation of a condition was pending, is blatantly flouting the spirit of the planning and enforcement system. This case does make me wonder how many other unapproved changes have been made in this development of 165 homes and also others around the district. We only know about this one because of eagle-eyed residents. Developers know that enforcement cases are stopped once a retrospective application is submitted and they play that system. I fear the message of this breach of planning is clear to any developer or even private householder, and that is make changes to the permission, and if anyone notices, simply put in a retrospective plan and application. I recently attended a seminar hosted by the Town and Country Planning Association which said that public confidence in the planning process is dependent upon its readiness to back up its planning policies and decision making by taking appropriate action in response to breaches of planning control. Hugh Ellis, the TCPA's Director of Policy, said effective enforcement is the bedrock of planning control and plays a great part in ensuring that the quality of the build and natural environment is preserved and enhanced. My objection is in no way a criticism of the overstretched enforcement team at Braintree, and I understand that there have been or there are moves to expand the team which must be welcomed. But to avoid planning anarchy, I do feel a line needs to be drawn in the sand and this variation of condition application should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorogood. Thank you very much for your statement. I'll wait for Councillor Thorogood to... It's quite all right. I'm not rushing you. I'm just... It's fine. Thank you very much. Good night. There are no other speakers on this application or this variation, and this is going to be taken by Chris this evening. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good evening, members. So the application before you is a Section 73 application to vary the previous planning permission, and what we're looking at here is changes to the approved plans. So, as referenced by Councillor Thorogood within his statement, it relates to, first of all, internal reconfiguration of a particular house type, which is the Decker house type, and amendments to the rear elevations of those relevant plots. So I'll just take you through the plans to start with. And apologies, my computer's now just frozen. I think I may have lost connection. Bear with me. Am I?
Wait to share your screen again. There we go.
Okay. Right, I'll try that again. So, to start off with, so the approved site plan is before you. So, as mentioned, the changes relate to 5 particular blocks of housing which are indicated on the stars on the approved site plan there. So it's 14 houses in total, and it's specifically the Decker house type. So you can see 2 of those in the northern part of the site, and then you've got the 3 in the corner. So just taking you through the previously approved plans. So the elevation of the floor plans on the screen are the ones which were approved previously as part of the Reserve Matters application. So the key things to note is on the rear elevation plan, you can see the central bedroom window on the rear, and on the floor plan you can see that the bedroom, again, you've got the central window, and you can see the arrangement of that particular bedroom. Within bedroom 2, which was located towards the front of the property, you had a cupboard in this location, and it was indicated to be a single room. So the changes which are proposed, you will be able to see again on the elevation of the floor plan. So starting with the rear elevation, you can see the introduction of a new single light window here for the ensuite bathroom, and you can see that the bedroom window has been relocated on the elevation slightly, moved over to accommodate the position of the ensuite. And on the floor plan, so you can see the bedrooms to the rear. You can see the arrangement of the ensuite bathroom in a sort of an L shape, and at the front of the bedroom you can see that the bedroom has been changed from a single bedroom to the double bedroom, and I'll come back to that point in a second. Just a couple of photos. So as referenced, the development has been under construction, with a number of the units have been finished. The Decker house type is the property to the left-hand side of that photograph, and that's obviously the front elevation of the property. We have only a few limited photographs of the site because it was difficult when it was under construction. So the house type in question you can see just peering between the property and the garage, but slightly more clearly on one of the photos that was sent from one of the adjacent residential properties looking towards the back. So you can see the Decker house type towards the rear, and you can see the arrangement of the windows on the rear elevation. So in terms of key considerations, I'm just going to flick back to the changes in the plans. So The issue, so a number of issues. So first of all, the application is part retrospective in that the changes on some of the properties have been made prior to the application obviously being considered. And while that's something which we would, you know, we do not want to see as the local planning authority in terms of members' consideration of that application, members still need to consider the proposals on their own merits based on the details of the proposals and whether or not those are acceptable or not. In terms of the elevation changes from officers' perspective, in terms of the change to the appearance of the property, it's not considered that the introduction of that additional window or the realignment of the main bedroom window has a detrimental impact upon the character appearance of those particular house types or on the wider development. In terms of overlooking and the neighbouring impacts, I think the key important point to note is that there is no change to the siting of these properties and their relationship with the neighbouring properties. So while we note that there have been concerns raised as part of the planning process and as reiterated by Councillor Thorogood, we don't consider that the introduction of that single additional window on the rear elevation would be so detrimental to warrant the refusal of planning permission on those grounds. It's also obviously that the window in question is to an ensuite, and that window would be obscure glazed as well, albeit the window could be openable, but it's a single light window, and the main window on the elevation would remain, which is the bedroom one. So from officers' perspective, the final sort of key consideration really was then the impact in terms of the internal floor area and specifically the floor space standards within the nationally described space standards. So originally this was proposed as a two-bedroom, three-person dwelling for this particular house type. So that is a double room and a single room effectively. Now, initially there was certainly some concern from officer perspective that the introduction of the ensuite reduced the size effectively of the originally proposed double bedroom, such that it fell below the standards. But following discussions with the applicant in this case, effectively they've been able to reconfigure the arrangement so that bedroom 1, as it was, now becomes bedroom 2 with the ensuite. So effectively that becomes the single bedroom, and the space standards there comply and exceed the nationally described space standards. And then what was originally bedroom 2 now becomes the main double bedroom from the property. And again, I just highlight on the approved plans there was previously a cupboard in this location. That's been removed to ensure that there's sufficient space for a double bed to go into that room, and also still for some storage space within that room. And you'll note the reference within the report to the integral cupboard area, and that's where we've gone away and had to consider whether or not we would consider that to be inclusive within the actual measurement and calculations for the floor space for the room. And with following careful consideration of it, review of the standards, and also having a look at case law and appeal decisions, we've come to the conclusion that it falls within the requirements, and therefore it technically meets the standards. So on that basis, from a design, neighbouring impacts perspective, and also in terms of the reconfiguration of the internal arrangement, the proposal in planning terms is considered to be acceptable from an officer's perspective, and is therefore recommended for approval on that basis. I think the last thing, probably just to comment, because it was touched on by Councillor Thorogood, is fully appreciate the frustration from residents that this is obviously part retrospective. As I said, from an officer perspective, this is not what we want to see from developers to be building without consent. And I would like to just reiterate that certainly from the LPA perspective and from officers' perspective, from my perspective, there's no that there is, should we have considered this to be unacceptable, there'd be no hesitation in terms of proceeding with enforcement action, but planning requires us to consider the proposal on its merits, and in this particular case, given that it meets policy and meets standards, and in our view it doesn't warrant the refusal, it clearly wouldn't be therefore expedient to pursue enforcement in this particular case. However, I do need to make clear that if we came to a different conclusion on the space standards, and actually if the floor plans had been deficient, we wouldn't have hesitated in actually going down that particular route. But given the conclusion we've reached on the floor space standards, we don't feel that there is a discrepancy anymore in terms of the technical requirements, and therefore the recommendation is positive and for approval in this case. Hopefully, Madam Chairman, that's clear. But obviously happy to answer any questions. Or apologies, I've got two quick photos to show just of the internal from the visits. So of the bedrooms to the rear, so you can see the ensuite on the left, and the cupboard that's subject to much discussion within the published report, which is above the stairs. So you can see it is still a usable space and storage space, which is included. And then just a highlight of conclusion. The other thing, just to be absolutely clear on, no objection from either of the heritage bodies in terms of impacts on the listed building, and as I said, in terms of design amenity and impact on neighbouring residential amenity, the proposal is considered to be acceptable. So happy to answer any questions, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Chris. I have no problem with the additional window as such, because I think as a bathroom window it's likely to be obscure glaze, so therefore I don't think there will be unacceptable overlooking, and appreciate the point about the distances as well, so I'm happy with that. My concern is with the space standards, because I understand the report, and what's effectively they've done is to swap the bedrooms around, so what was a single bedroom at the rear has now become a single bedroom at the front. The problem is I just had a look on the website for Bloor Homes for this particular development, and they're showing both bedrooms as two double bedrooms with a different floor plan, with a double bed rather than a single bed. I just want to have your comments on that.
So obviously it's not within the control of the local planning authority to control a developer in terms of what they publish and market. Obviously in terms of the plans that before it's clear that in terms of the arrangement of the floor plan, this is what's proposed and before members for consideration. Obviously we cannot control how any of these properties or how any property is used in the future. But the point behind the standards and the reason why it was introduced is to ensure that effectively the housing stock was of a sufficient quality and actually was sufficient space and dimensions to be able to accommodate a certain amount of storage space, and obviously clearly for bedrooms a double bed and a single bed for smaller bedrooms, and that actually the overall widths and the sizes of the internal space was sufficient. So I'm happy to pick that up separately with Bloor, but strictly speaking I think in terms of the consideration of the application, what's before you, Councillor Parker, is the plans in front of you, which is for a two-bedroom, three-person dwelling. That's what's being considered, and those are the floor plans. But I do take the point in terms of what's being marketed, and I'm more than happy to pick that up with Bloor Homes directly.
I think my concern, sorry, if I just took a moment to come back, is that what is the single bedroom, what might meet the standards, the space standards for a single bedroom, it doesn't meet the space standards for a double bedroom. So why is it therefore being marketed? Why is it? They're seeking permission for a development or a dwelling that meets the space standards, but they're not actually marketing as such. So a dwelling which doesn't meet the space standards. Okay. I take the point about marketing there.
Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think I'm in agreement with the recommendation for the variation. It is an additional window, contrary to the original planning permission, but it is an obscure window in this context, and therefore the argument around overbearing or overlooking neighbours does fall away. There is a point in principle, though, and I know Chris quite rightly touched on it, and so did Councillor Thorogood. There's a point that a house builder has deviated from the original planning consent, and that's the ick with me, unfortunately. If there's anything that we can do as an LPA, in addition to obviously granting the permission tonight, which, by the way, I'm happy to move, Madam Chairman. Is there anything we can do to remind them of their duty so that we are not relying on the public to bring these to attention to us or our enforcement teams? And planning permission means planning permission, and there is a route to go down should they wish to vary that during the course of the design or the build-out of their properties. Unfortunately, it's Bloor Homes, and this seems to be par for the course, but anything we can do to change that would be most welcome. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Happy to move.
Councillor Hensman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was grateful.
Sorry, Councillor, did you move it?
I did, yes.
Oh, can I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Mann. Now I'll come to you, Councillor Hensman. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. I was glad of the additional pictures from Chris, because that was going to be one of my questions, in that had they been in to see that the changes had in fact been effected, because once someone's in there, you wouldn't necessarily go and knock the door and they say, oh, well, there was a cupboard, I've taken it out, and we can't control what the resident does. But from the point of view of the overlooking, from your picture, I did notice that the privacy of the glass, I could make out things on the other side. Could we do two things? One is restrict the opening so that there is no overlooking, and such that the window's not left open in case you do decide to use the bathroom. And secondly, up the privacy of that glass to 5, because I could see, as I say, you can actually make out things through that window reasonably clearly. Between the two, you can see the apex of the two roofs there. Whereas if it goes up to 5, you get the light, but you don't get the overlooking, and it works both ways. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would you like to respond before I go on to Councillor Arthur?
So taking the 2 points in turn, in terms of the obscurity of the glass, so if you like, the established standard that typically is put on by most authorities, including Braintree now, but also in terms of what the inspectorate would usually do, is a level 3, which is the Pilkington level 3, which is halfway along the scale. So I'd take the point in terms of 5 would be absolute obscurity, but at this level, from an officer perspective, we would say this is what is standardly being applied in terms of conditions. This is a level of obscurity that means that you couldn't oversee or overlook your neighbour at that sort of level. In terms of the opening, I think that is something which obviously it's within members' gift to change the wording of the condition to require it to be non-openable. The difficulty I think with that is, given the siting of the dwellings, and given that you've already got the main bedroom window on the elevation, given there's no change to the siting or the proximity to neighbours, in terms of the justification for adding that condition, we would have to have some concern over the level of increase, the type of overlooking is increasing effectively, and although it's an additional window, given the position of it and given the original position of the bedroom window, I think I would struggle to argue that actually the impact of that is such that we would be able to justify that a condition would be necessary, and therefore that it meets the test for a planning condition. It's obviously within members' gift if members wanted to condition. Obviously, for the properties that have already been completed, I think that particular window, I don't think there is a top opening, as you can see from the photograph there. So it is side openable. So the actual window type there, we would actually have to require a new window to be installed. I think should such a condition be imposed, I think it's highly probable that the applicant would appeal that condition. And as I said, I would just question our ability to defend that in pure planning terms, in terms of the necessity for that condition. If it was an elevation with no windows, and this was something which was being introduced, I don't think there would be, certainly I wouldn't have anywhere near the level of concern about adding such a condition. But I think going back to the elevation plan, and maybe if it'd be helpful if I just flick back to the original plan, there you go. You can see the on the rear elevation, the central location of the window and the introduction. And I would really struggle to say in planning terms that position is such that it would give rise to such a level of overlooking that we would need that additional control. You would imagine as well that obviously the window for the residents' perspective would be closed the majority of the time as well. And obviously being an ensuite, it's not a habitable room. So again, if it was a study or a different type of internal room, I think it would be easier to argue. But it's obviously within members' decision as to whether or not you wanted to amend that condition or add a further condition to that effect. Hopefully those comments are helpful, Madam Chairman.
How would we stand if these properties have already been sold? I mean, surely that becomes a legal battle between the developer and the new owners. They want to go in and do something that we've said they've got to do.
So strictly speaking, if members were minded to impose the condition, then the developer would need to speak and get agreement from the residents. Ultimately, effectively, if we were to put on such a condition, if that condition was not complied with, we should then be, following it through with enforcement. And again, the enforcement in those cases would not be against the developer, because the land ownership would then change to the individual homeowners. But again, in terms of the expediency of enforcement, in this particular case, it still comes back to the planning justification for why that is required in planning terms. And again, it comes down to a judgment on the impact in terms of overlooking and on neighbouring residential amenity. And I think that's where I would struggle from an expediency perspective if we were faced with an enforcement situation as to that actually in this particular case that level of harm is such that it would warrant enforcement action.
Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Following up the point made about checking on developers, I believe as part of the enforcement review we agreed to have a compliance officer. I presume we haven't got one yet. No. But just to reassure members, that was the intention. So this would be an officer who would proactively go round sites checking for exactly this type of thing, whereas now, yes, it often would rely on what residents might see or what a district ward member or the parish council might see. And on that basis, as we are now, I very much agree with what Councillor Thorogood said about the risk that this has happened on other sites we might not know about it, or perhaps this developer has done other things. I mean, certainly locally, one of the things they've been doing in recent years is creating unauthorised accesses, which we have, as a council, taken enforcement action against in a couple of cases. But it does seem that sometimes when developers get on site, they assume they can just do what they like to a certain extent. I think this is quite a difficult one because they've effectively set up a fait accompli here, especially with what Mr. Pagey said about we could end up taking enforcement action against private owners who bought the house and through no fault of their own, it was the developer who set the situation up. The harm isn't massive because the number of houses is relatively limited on the whole site. But one of the issues I've got with it is actually the design change. And if you look on page 77, some of the residents who've objected have said about the elevation changing to being busy. And of course, it's not just the individual house where this is; they're in groups. So you've got this sort of row of windows, doubling in effect the number of windows across the elevation. So it's a very difficult one. This I'm not going to support it, and I'm not going to go the other way. I'm just going to abstain because I just feel that they've left us in an almost an impossible situation. And yes, let's hope we can recruit a compliance officer as soon as possible. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Councillor Mann.
Thank you. Well, I understand the irritation of ward members and residents and members here tonight. With retrospective applications like this, you are sometimes left with the feeling that the applicant has tried to get away with something and been found out. It leaves a nasty taste very often in the mouth. And I think if it's possible to communicate our displeasure with the applicant, we ought to do that. But I do agree, and we also ought to try and point out to them that their advertising is now misleading and therefore probably unlawful. I think that point's going to be made with them as well. If they're still attempting to market something that doesn't exist. But I agree with the officer's overall recommendation that there, in planning policy terms, there isn't enough here, I think, for us to refuse the sort of variation. So, as has been said, you know, it is a fait accompli. We're pretty much stuck because we don't want to enforce on people who already purchased a property in good faith. So I shall support the recommendation for that reason.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hensworth, would you switch your microphone?
No,
Oh, sorry, I haven't called you yet.
sorry, I haven't got one other than that one. No, I just wanted...
Oh, sorry, I've got Councillor Swift before you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. Sorry, that's... Sorry, I'll do it in order of where I see.
Thank you, Chair. I'm tending to agree with Officer's comments on this, and considering the reconfiguration of the proposed variation, I actually think it's a really good idea to have another bedroom, another light, another window into the ensuite as proposed. And I'm pleased to see that because I also think actually it improves the design of the rear elevation. I haven't got a problem at all with it. And I think with regards to the facility that's going to offer those people that are going to move into that house, it's going to be an awful lot better. And the other thing is I'd just like to note that although this may have been called in by the public, I think it's essential that, you know, we allow developers to come back and make variations as well. I'm sort of a bit concerned about some of the comments that have been made around the table tonight, but I'm happy that variations exist, and I basically agree with the officer's comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't. I don't think we can change it because people have moved into the houses, they've probably established themselves by now. But I think it makes a bit of a mockery of a planning committee if people are building houses that don't conform to the plans they've put in and then tell you afterwards. So no, I don't think it's right.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you switch your microphone? Did you want to come back for when put a vote? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just coming back on those particular comments, so I think just on the variation point, so it's very common in planning that developments of a certain scale, there'd always be variations to schemes, particularly on developments like this. That might be for technical reasons or following further investigation. So it's very common that you'll see variations of applications as things go through the planning process. I think the key thing is, from a local planning authority perspective, obviously we want to see those variation applications come in before we get to the critical bit of building so that we can consider them. But the fundamental point in planning is if you build something without consent, you're not actually breaking the law. The developer or the applicant is effectively proceeding at their own risk, and it doesn't mean that that is a fait accompli in terms of an approval, because we still need to consider the merits of what's been done and whether or not in planning terms it's acceptable or not. And clearly there have been cases, and we've had cases recently, where we have taken issue with what's been built and we have proceeded with seeking to take very firm enforcement action against applicants and developers on that basis. But it is just a, it's an issue for applicants and developers that really, should changes like this need to be made, they need to be made in good time, they need to be considered and go through the planning process. It's unfortunate in this case in terms of where we've arrived at. As I said, certainly from an officer's perspective, it obviously makes it more difficult to consider these type of applications, but we still need to take an objective look in terms of the merits and come to a decision on planning terms. But from an enforcement perspective, fundamentally, if there was something that had been built which was unacceptable in planning terms, as an authority, we would not be hesitating in proceeding to take enforcement action. And as Councillor Abbott has referenced, we're in the process of more than doubling the size of our planning enforcement team, which will include a compliance officer, hopefully, as well. And as part of that, strategic sites like this will be more closely monitored than what we're able to do at the moment, which is purely reactionary. So hopefully those comments are of some assistance. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it has been moved by Councillor Ritchie and seconded by Councillor Mann that we approve this variation. All those in favour for the variation? Those against? Abstentions? That has been agreed. That brings us to the end of our items for this evening. And I'll close the meeting at 11 minutes past 8. Thank you very much indeed, members, for your attendance.